most problems stem to discovery. And a lot of people don't realize that because they'll see that the breakdown happens somewhere else in the process and they'll attribute it to that later stage. Because later down the funnel, if the customer has not been made aware of why this truly matters, they don't see the urgency to continue.
Jeff Kirchick. Jeff is a sales coach, VP of sales, a proven sales leader, and an author.
It's not about being liked. It's about being trusted. And so if you present an honest version of yourself, people will trust the words you say. And in sales, trusting the words you say is incredibly important. There is an irony that if they care less, they can actually be more productive. And the reason for that is that if they're able to let go of whatever their agenda is, then they can actually more freely listen and try to guide and help a client.
Jeff Kirchick, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
What is the best piece of coaching advice that you've ever received in your career?
Yeah, it's a pretty generic one, but the best coaching advice I'd say is to listen. Sales is about listening. It's not about talking. And I think I needed to learn that early in my career. When I first got into sales, I didn't really get super formal sales training because I worked at I don't even know if it was seed stage or Series A startup at the time, but it was an early stage company. And, I got some basic sales training from some of the people who worked there, but nothing super formal. I kind of relied on my, what I thought was whatever charisma I had and personality and, tried to be knowledgeable and more of an expert about what I was doing. And I really hustled and I was on Twitter meeting people in my industry and whatever. And I guess you could say I brute forced my way through a lot of things. But it wasn't until my next job where the CEO of the parent company came in to do a sales training with us. And he asked us, what's the most important skill to have in sales? And no one in the room got it right. And the answer was listening. And it really changed the trajectory of my career. And again, it's a simple one. I think most people who work in sales know that listening is the most important coaching you can get in sales. But there's different levels of listening. You can listen, you can hear something, but then there's actual, active listening, which requires an actual curiosity about the other person. And the difference is that, if somebody were to say, I have a dog and his name is Max or something, and you say, oh, I also have a dog. You're actually just thinking about yourself in a way that you can make that about you and not whatever they just told you. So while you did hear what they have to say, you weren't really genuinely curious, because if you were, you would ask them to tell you more about Max, or what do you love about Max, or whatever. So I think that these are the lessons of coaching that I think have been the most impactful for me, is how can I become a better listener? It's a really good skill to have, not just in sales, but also just in life. To really hear other people and listen to them and not view things through the lens of your own perspective.
I love that. And it's one that's come up more and more. One of I had a guy called Richard Harris on a few weeks ago, and that was one of the biggest things he said. His one was actually specific. He was like, he got told by a mentor similar to you, it was talk 25% less. So it was framed slightly differently, but ultimately the same thing. How is that piece of advice that you've had, what would you say is the most impactful thing that you now find yourself saying to teams, or that you've, written in the books you've authored and things like that? What would you say the most impactful piece of advice is that you find yourself having to give out repeatedly?
Yeah, the most impactful advice that I think I've given to others that they seem to appreciate, just based on what I hear from my team and whatever, is almost a little bit more of like a Buddhist philosophy, which is to care less about whatever they're doing. I think that that's a bit counterintuitive, because as a sales leader, we obviously want people to care quite a bit and we want them to do their job. But there is an irony that if they care less, they can actually be more productive. And the reason for that is that if they're able to let go of whatever their agenda is, then they can actually more freely listen and try to guide and help a client. If you're looking at it, again, through the lens of a selfish lens, where you have your own agenda and your own needs, then naturally the way you speak and communicate and think is going to be biased towards achieving your goals and not the customer's goals. So to some degree, they need to let go and not view, everything that's in front of us, we place disproportionate emphasis on. We view it as critically important. But the reality is that there was life before that thing and there will be life after that thing. And if the customer doesn't move forward, your life will also go on. And in the grand scheme of things, we are specks of dust in a broad universe when what we're doing is actually kind of meaningless. So I kind of make a joke to my team sometimes, like, if they get all bent out of shape about something, I'll say, don't worry, you're just a speck of dust anyway. They've made the joke that, I just think they're specks of dirt or whatever. And I think very little of them, which is obviously not the case. But the reality is just that if they're able to let go of their agenda and their attachment, they'll be much better off.
That's so funny, Jeff. I love that. Me and all my friends, whenever any of us get kind of stressed and we'll be in the group chat talking about work or anything, we have a thing we say to each other. We're like, do you think you're standing still? And then they're like, what do you mean? And you're like, we are on a rock hurtling through the void with nothing around it. And we are really, really unimportant. So like, one of my friends works in London in sales. The other guy works in, e-commerce remotely. And I'm like, just because you've had it means nothing, bro. It means, zoom out. And that's it. So that's funny that, that's something you said. And this is something, when I was doing the research for this and everything you've done, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you so much is whilst you do talk about the sales stuff, a big thing that you seem to talk about is how we take those principles into daily life and kind of vice versa. Where did adopting that kind of ethos come from? Was there a specific point in your sales career where you realized like, there's skills I'm learning here that I can bring into my personal life, or did it start the other way around? How did that come about?
Yeah. So I think the reason I felt that way is because, again, as someone who worked in like these earlier stage companies, my exposure to very scientific formulas for sales was very limited. I was really relying on my own instincts, and I'm not saying that's a good thing. There were certainly, when I look back, there were many moments where I wish that I had had a more scientific way of thinking of things. But with that being said, I was able to win multi-million-dollar contracts with Fortune 500 brands, banks, telecommunications companies, healthcare companies, work that is otherwise pretty challenging to do, relying on some of my own instincts about relationship building and wanting to help others. I mean, one of my blessings and curses is that I wear my heart on my sleeve. And that can be a bad thing in a lot of ways, but it can also be a good thing. And I think clients learned to trust me. They knew that I was telling them the truth, even if the truth wasn't always good. And because I had their trust, there was more impact to what I was saying. And what I realized is that, I was having success with this methodology because I was applying the way that I would treat any close friend or family member, just my client. I genuinely wanted them to do well. And because of that, I was having success. And so that's when I had the idea that maybe writing a book about this could be useful. But it stands true in all things. I mean, I think one of the chapters in the book that I appreciate maybe even more than others is a chapter called "The Customer is Not Always Right." And it's about how you need to stand up for yourself and not treat yourself as subordinate to your client. Sometimes clients can be kind of reckless and, they can treat you a certain way. And, if you were in a relationship or your spouse or whatever, and they did something that was bad, you wouldn't just say, "Oh, okay, Mr. Customer, I'm sorry about that. And, we'll do better next time." You would probably try to level set with them about what are the boundaries in your relationship. And I think the same is true in your professional relationships. And that people need to understand that they really shouldn't treat these any differently than they would treat anyone else. And by doing so, you will actually create better relationships and better boundaries. So I think that's where it came from. It came from an organic experience. And that's why I was so passionate about it.
Do you think that initial problem that so many sales team members had, by the sounds of it, yourself as well on a personal side, do you think that comes from not sort of lacking the confidence? Because as you said at the beginning, they've got the knowledge, that technical knowledge of what they're trying to sell. But do you think the hole in the game perhaps is having the confidence to kind of stand up for themselves? Or do you think it's literally they just want to make sure that they can get the deal through so that they can get a nice bonus at the end of the quarter?
Yeah, I think it is somewhat a lack of confidence, but I think it's also the way that we teach people and we train people in our industry sometimes. A lot of times they become a little bit robotic in the way that they do things, because if you're overly scientific as a sales leader, then you're teaching people like you got to ask these questions in discovery, and if we don't have these answers, then it's not qualified. And to some degree, that can be counterproductive because it's not, the way that these conversations move is not necessarily linear. I often talk about the sales process actually being nonlinear, which is that sometimes you need to take 2 steps backwards to take 1 step forward. An example would be, several years ago, I was working with a bank and the bank was excited to do a pilot. And we had like a motion where we would run a pilot into like a paid agreement. So naturally this was music to my ears and I agreed to it. But the problem was that I had done a really poor job in some of the earlier steps in my process. And what I should have done was actually said no to the pilot because where they wanted to pilot us was not a good place for us to do it. And I should have actually asked that we run discovery in other groups within that bank. And so where I'm going with this, Sandy, is that, if you're too regimented, you can actually create some bad behaviors, and what feels like inorganic types of conversations. And so I think that the reason salespeople oftentimes struggle with this is because they're taught to be very linear and to be very focused. And I think that some degree of that is good. You do need to have some guardrails in terms of what people should and shouldn't be doing throughout the way. But you also need to allow for some personal freedom and creativity for you need to allow people to exist within the framework, because otherwise, why do you even have them? Why not just have a machine, AI, just run your entire sales process if it's that simple? So I think that that's kind of where the problem comes from. It's that we have sometimes overly prescriptive, methodologies for people. And if they get that early in their career, it's hard for them to bounce back.
It's that age-old thing where like it's far easier to learn something new than unlearn something that you've already become so used to, right?
Yep.
And that kind of brings nicely into authenticity, which I know is a huge part of what you speak about. And actually, so many of the guests I've had on recently talking about the sales industry have echoed this as well. Why is authenticity so important? Kind of build on what you've just said there. It's kind of a buzzword, right? So many, it's almost to the point where it's like a red flag where, some A or whatever is applying for a new role and they're like, we inspire you to be authentically yourself and stuff. And you're like, all right, okay, is this true? But I guess 2 things. Why is that authenticity so important? And then how can people going into a new role or within a company, where can they sort of sniff out the culture and recognize that is actually something important that the company sort of believes in? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Well, I agree with you. It is a buzzword. I will say I did write my book like 6 years ago before all of this AI and authenticity stuff was in the world. So I'm proud of that. I'm happy that about that piece of it. But you're right. It is something that gets like thrown around all the time. And what does it even mean? And like, why does it matter? So there's actually science behind it. And there's interesting studies people can read, but authenticity is one of the most attractive things about a person. Like there's actual data that talks about this, that people are really drawn to authentic people. And I give a lot of examples of it, not in the book, but just in interviews I've done. And it's interesting because a lot of authentic people are not good people or people that you like. And so I'll give you a couple examples. Like Dennis Rodman, I'm not saying he's a bad person or someone you don't like, but Dennis Rodman is a really weird guy. And he's the only person in the United States that Kim Jong-un in North Korea wants to be friends with. And I'm not saying that we should try to be best friends with, brutal foreign dictators. It's not the point of this, but the point is that why does he like him? And the reason is that Dennis Rodman he's not acting. He is that type of person. He's a very strange guy, but he's authentically strange. There's a lot of people that are strange that are putting on an act. Another example might be like Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. If you've ever watched the show, very unlikable guy, right? I mean, but that he speaks his mind, right? Like, that what makes him unlikable is that he's so honest. Like he will tell you the unpleasant thing that you're not supposed to say out loud. But what that means is that you would trust him. Like if he's made a comment to you and he said like, I don't like your outfit today, like you would believe him that like he doesn't like your outfit today. Like he will tell you the uncomfortable truth. And so like that's incredibly important. When it comes to authenticity, it's not about being liked. It's about being trusted. And so if you present an honest version of yourself, people will trust the words you say. And in sales, trusting the words you say is incredibly important. It comes down to how much conviction do people have in what you say about what you can do. And if they fully believe you and you say, yeah, we will do, I 100% believe we will do a great job for you. That's incredibly important. They don't need to like you. You could be Dennis Rodman. You could be Larry David. They need to believe you. And those are two different things. And so when it comes to a company culture, what I often do is like, if I'm interviewing somebody, I'll ask them to tell me like, what is it that they're bad at? What is their professional development weakness? How do they find it? How are they tackling it? And that's a great way for me to understand if they're authentic, because sometimes people will say, oh, I work too hard, or, something that's not a real flaw, right? It's like something that they can say so that they don't look bad. But if they say something like, my close rates were slightly less than my colleagues last year, and I think that I have a problem with my discovery, or something like that. That's actually that's a thoughtful answer. Like, it's a data-driven answer. Like, clearly there's something I'm doing wrong there and I need to fix it. And here's how I identified it. How I'm going to fix it. I actually would love to hire the person who's very flawed, but knows that they're flawed and self-aware and will fix it, because that person, I know they're moving in the right direction. Someone who tells me they're amazing, it might actually be amazing, but doesn't have that self-awareness, it's harder to trust. And so the same is true for a company. I'll give you an example of actually, I mentored someone for a program for underrepresented individuals looking to get into tech sales. And this guy happened to be a Black man. And he looked at the company's website and he saw that there were no Black people in the company. And he came to me and he said, Jeff, there's like 50 people here. None of them look like me. I want to ask them about their commitment to, having a more diverse culture, but I'm nervous that if I ask them this question, that it might backfire on me. And I asked him a question. I said, if it backfired on you for asking that question, would you want to work at that company? And he thought about it and he realized that there was actually no downside to asking the question, because either he would get a good answer that he liked, or he would get a negative answer that he didn't like, and he wouldn't work at a bad company. And so he ended up asking this very direct question. And I forget what he got an answer that he appreciated, and he ended up working at this company. But I think that the way you suss things out is to ask very direct questions. I noticed that half your sales team churned last year. Why is that? And what are you doing to prevent that? Right? Like, you got to ask the hardball questions. If they don't like being asked difficult questions, or they don't like you for asking difficult questions, then guess what? You're not going to be able to exist in that culture where you can challenge people and ask them hard questions. You probably don't want to work there anyway. So to me, there's no downside to doing that. I'd rather find out quickly. It's like qualifying a lead. If they can't handle the heat, then good. Like, well, let's just not work together. But if they can, it's good. Like, and now I can come in and confidently say that it's a good place to be.
The question thing is, again, something that continues to come up in these conversations that I'm having as well, because in terms of thinking about traditional coaching and the way it's done within sales, but also just, I guess, the corporate world in general, the people at the top, a higher level of seniority, usually are the ones that are receiving continuous coaching to help them develop and climb even further up. But actually, it's the younger, perhaps AEs or reps that are the ones that actually need that coaching most. And often the conversations I've had, the ability to be able to ask those difficult questions and have like the confidence, but also just the be able to articulate it in a way that's not going to upset everyone and things. That's actually something that kind of younger, more junior team members need. Is that something that you've kind of come across as well? And, in organizations you've either worked in or helped out with? And what sort of work do you think needs to be done on that in terms of kind of balancing out, more senior members receiving coaching, but also those younger members receiving it, so that they can feel empowered to ask those questions, like you said about the other guy? Do you kind of know what I mean with that?
Yeah. So how do you work with reps of different levels of experience and seniority to gain the confidence to ask challenging questions and
100%.
sales calls or things like that?
Because I think those younger kind of team members, often they're the ones that need that coaching and that guidance the most, but actually they're at the bottom of the pile when it comes to who's getting access to that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I like the expression lead from the front. It's kind of where you do the thing that you ask others to do. So, when we had a prospecting competition recently, I was doing my own cold calling because I'm asking people to do something hard. I might as well do it with them. And I was unsuccessful and, people made fun of me, but at least I tried. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that that's, important. And I try to do that with my team. Like I kind of encourage them to put me on calls with them. Right. And like, I think if they see me asking these questions in the calls, they start to gain an appreciation for why they should do it. I mean, especially if it goes well or they can see what the benefit is. And it's kind of like seeing is believing. And as someone who's a writer, there's an expression that you get taught in creative writing classes. And it's probably the only thing that was useful to me in my creative writing classes, but it was, show, don't tell. And so obviously if I can show someone how to do something, they're going to be more likely to adopt the idea. It's going to be more their idea than my idea. If I go tell them, hey, these are the things you should be doing on the call, then yes, they can internalize that. But most people learn by experience. They learn by seeing things. They learn by, that's the way that they adopt ideas. And so I think that that's what I try to do is try to be present in their meetings, and try to, help that way. I think with some of the more junior folks, um, I will encourage them to send me calls too that I can score. And so what I will do is I will actually tell them like, this is the question that I would have asked here and here's why. So again, nothing revolutionary there, but I do try to help reinforce it just by showing them the moments where, if I were running it, how I might have steered it a little bit differently.
With going back to Dennis Rodman again, you've been on both sides of the coin, but with the authenticity thing, how important is it to find that balance? Because obviously, like you said, the Dennis Rodman thing, it's great and it's so important that you're authentic and that they feel they can ask the difficult questions. And if they've got that wired naturally, amazing. But also, at the end of the day, they are there to kind of read the script. I know that's maybe bad to say, but they are there to read the script and sell the one specific thing. So if they're there the whole time, kind of being crazy and throwing themselves around and being themselves, where do you kind of find that line of staying authentically yourself, but also making sure that you are sticking to the script and actually delivering at work?
Yeah, the way I think about it is that you've got a rubric or a framework that they exist within, but they have some creative liberty about how they want to live within the framework. So to give you an
Sure.
example, like I'm very passionate about cold outreach, cold emailing, things like that. I built an online course about this it's called Weirder Than Waldo. It's my way of doing cold outreach. It's very, out there and unique. But there's a formula for it. It starts with the way that you do a subject line. There's a way that you do an opener, a value proposition, and ask, and I give some guidance around that. And that's the formula that I want them to follow, right? So they should follow the formula, but how they do that is entirely up to them, right? And so sometimes I've had people that are sticking very much to relevance, where they look at something that's relevant, that's happening to that person in their industry, and they're observing it and they're using my formula in a way that's a little more professional. But, maybe if there's a new Star Wars movie that comes out, their subject line is like, read or read not, there is no try. And, they've got some sort of Star Wars opening or something like that. And like, they're still following the formula. And again, like these are two very diametrically opposed messages. One is very serious. It's very professional. The other is a little unserious. It's funny, but it is relevant and it's analogous to whatever we're trying to sell and why it's relevant to them, but just in a more funny way. And I'm fine with either of those things. And I think you can be authentic in that framework, but you're still following my guidance, which is that you need to follow this structure. This structure works. I know it works because I've been doing this for 15 years and it works amazingly. And, to some degree, it's like, hey, just please trust me on this one. But the other part of it is like, but you can still do whatever you want, right? I'm not going to make you write a script or whatever. And I think the same is true for my sales calls. Like we're running discovery, and yeah, I mean, there's some things that we obviously need to ask in the first call, and it's not even being inauthentic. It's information that we would need to gather right away to understand whether it's a good fit. But then there are also questions like why anything or why now that I want to get answered on a call. But I'm not telling them to ask why anything or why now. There's a way that they can get there, through other questions that they can ask. I can even give guidance on how they can get there, right? But like the point is that they know that these are the types of things that they want to try to understand early, but I'm not prescribing how they do it. I'm giving them the framework for what would make it successful, is getting an understanding of why anything and why now. And if we don't know that after the discovery call, then chances are it's not a good fit. If we can't answer why anything after the first call, we shouldn't be begging the customer to feel pain, right? So that's kind of the guidance, is like, this is what you should be trying to achieve. And I can even give you recommendations about how to get there. But at the end of the day, it's up to you.
I guess it's like the opposite of the cliche of like, it is actually all about the destination rather than the journey. You can take your own journey, but as long as you arrive at each touch point and eventually get to that destination, kind of do it yourself, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Talk to me more about the cold outreach then. In your experience, have you noticed that actually taking the slightly weirder, I guess, dare I say, more authentic route rather than kind of following the script, which end do you find yields the most success?
It's interesting because we live in really we live in unprecedented times, and my perspective on this is changing a little bit, but I'll explain that. So yes, the weirder approach was worked for a very, very long time. And the reason, there's actually a very practical reason for why it works. So we'll go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but with AI, this idea of what was called personalization, let's call it 6 to 8 years ago, everyone was talking about personalization. Okay. So you notice something about somebody and you make it feel like you personalize the email because, hey, Sandy, I saw you went to this college and, go Tigers or whatever. Okay. And back then it was actually like somewhat of a novel thing to do. Now with AI, it's become completely commoditized. I mean, I get the dumbest emails like, hey, Jeff, I saw you minored in French in college and, something about French, or, I saw you went to Princeton and they have great reunions or whatever. It's like really dumb stuff. Some of them even say, I read your book. And I'll say, what was your favorite chapter? And it gives me an AI generated response, which, I know it's fake, right? So like
right.
What's happening is that what was once unique has become commoditized. So now something that 10 years ago would have felt like an interesting email now looks like spam. But what doesn't look like spam is your ability to relate it to the self. And the reason for that is that AI doesn't have a soul. AI doesn't have human experiences. So if I say, hey, I'll give you an example. I wrote an email to American Airlines many years ago, their head of customer service, and it was about how they tweeted with a Twitter account that I made for my cat. Okay, it's a dumb thing, but I sent an email about it. And it was about how I, as an American Airlines frequent flyer, came to appreciate how much they value their customers through this experience I had where they had a viral Twitter exchange with my cat. Okay. Now, this is not something AI can come up with because I had screenshots of the tweets and it did go viral, like Fancy Feast, like saw it. And like I got a bunch of free cat food out of this. Like it was a whole thing. But that's a story that only I can tell. And AI cannot tell that story. So that's why my approach works and will continue to work for a pretty long time, I think, is because AI can't replicate that while also being honest. Okay. Now, the second part of your question here, though, is like, we live in an unprecedented era with AI where you can now pick up signals and intent that you could never figure out before. Okay. So a basic one, and actually this is something you've probably been able to do for a while, but just for the sake of this conversation, let's say you work for a company that helps cut costs. And we know that any company that was recently acquired by private equity is probably looking to cut costs, right? So maybe we can build campaigns that target companies that were bought by PE in the last 90 days, right? Like that's something that's very simple, but maybe even they have job postings where they're trying to hire an internal recruiter. We know they're going to be growing and therefore they might need, X solution, right? Like we have more information now about what companies are thinking of doing before they've even acted on it or what would make them good candidates to do the thing. And so I do think that now more than ever, if you are using these agents, these AI agents to your advantage, you can build some really, really sharp and unique and clever knowledgeable campaigns that are not funny or frankly very human at all, but are really just grounded in realities of a business and what someone's trying to solve. And I think that you can do that very effectively.
Another part of what I've been speaking about so much with people is this idea of using these AI tools and things like that. And actually, the conversation people have been saying that generally most sales teams, especially, are very much overcomplicating their workflow rather than simplifying the execution when it comes to AI, because they're kind of building it on a shaky foundation already. They're not actually addressing whether what we've just been talking about, the authenticity of their reps and things. Because let's face it, like AI SDRs, they're just not there yet, are they? So it is still that human on that end of it. Down the line, perhaps it'll be AI AEs talking to each other that then get handed over to SDRs, but that's probably another conversation. And also, I'm saying too many vowels now, and I'm confusing myself. But you know, where do you think? First of all, like, do you agree with that sentiment that do you think utilizing AI within the kind of sales organizations, are they doing it right? And if not, what are ways for them to be integrating these tools into their workflows properly?
Yeah. It's hard for me to say. I mean, I think I have a perspective on what I'm doing and where I think the value is. It's hard for me to have a pulse on what everyone else is doing. I mean, certainly you mentioned like AI SDRs, like that does seem to be like one of the big things that gets talked about a lot. And my personal experience with them is mixed. And look, I just wrote a blog about how, I mean, I don't know how controversial it is because, people didn't, I was expecting to be fought in the comments a little more, but nobody really took me up on it. But, I was a longtime fan of Gong. I've been on many podcasts like this one where I sang their praises and, conversational intelligence. But now I'm not, I think that the call transcript is the holy grail. And then it's what do you do with it? And frankly, I'm building my own workflows with conversational intelligence. I don't use Gong. I just churned it last week after being a long time loyal customer. And what I'm doing instead is I'm building off of an AI orchestration tool to automate processes that would otherwise be time consuming. So to give you an example of that, like the big thing that I'm working on building right now is an automation where the data that comes from calls and emails will automatically update my CRM and then give the deal a score based on predetermined criteria that I've created. Okay. And so this is not something that Gong can do, but it's something that I will build myself. And the fact that I can do that myself in a matter of, and it will take time, right? People will say, oh, well, you have to build it. Yeah, you're right. It will, but I will build it. I am building it. It will get done. The fact that I can do that and that, a conglomerate, multi-billion dollar company can't, goes to show you how much things are changing. I think that companies, if they're smart, are going to start to see that there's a lot of point solutions out there. And they're going to start to say, well, how can I bring that in-house? And that doesn't mean that you literally use make.com or N8N and you literally build from scratch. There are other avenues that you can take with tools that are no code or low code types of tools where you can start building everything. All of our knowledge hub runs through this tool now. We can do one-click email replies to emails with tough questions with this tool. Like that's where I'm moving with AI. And it's not to replace people. It's to make them move faster. My team spends a lot of time doing things that I don't want them to be doing, whether it's running quotes, updating HubSpot. I can take that off their plate. I want them to be doing what I would call customer facing activities or high value activities. Yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Yeah. Remarkably similar to, the conversations we've had with people who've used Gong and what we've built at Pitstop and the differences in. I think one of the big things that in the conversations we've had is that people are now, and you've just echoed it there, people are looking for almost like a more custom solution rather than just a one size kind of fits all, because as AI is changing every single level of the framework. So what people are doing is becoming more and more diverse, and therefore their needs and wants aren't being covered by something that claims to kind of cover everything. And with, all these stats of, less than 1% of sales calls are ever kind of recorded and things, it's no wonder that, AEs, SDRs, people doing these reps, doing the calls, they're feeling like they're kind of going back to what we said earlier, they're feeling stuck and they're not receiving that coaching and things because humans literally don't have the time for it. Right. So, of course it makes sense that people are looking for that custom solution rather than just like, yeah, we'll just sort of throw this at it and have something tell you vague, oh yeah, try and be more authentic or
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, the thing is that like with that more custom solution, it can reach the entire organization. Because the use cases are not limited to like, okay, so I just talked about conversational intelligence and something I'm doing with conversational intelligence, but I'm still going to use that same tool to automate my quoting process, how to run a quote. Okay. Gong doesn't do that. That's not their space. They're a conversational intelligence tool. So what I'm going with this, Sandy, is that I can reach many use cases that many of which go outside of the go to market function entirely. I mean, like our content marketing lead uses the same tool to come up with content and content ideas. So that's where I see this. I think there's going to be a big consolidation towards these more custom builds or platforms that allow for more customization. I mean, to me, it feels very obvious that if you are one of the legacy, and again, I don't want anyone like beating down my door angrily, but if you are some of these legacy giants like Gong, even Clary for like forecasts, because you can do deep research now with Claude and tie it to your CRM and all this stuff, right? So like if you're a Clary, if you're a Gong, if you're, outreach for your lead gen, and look, like the signals are all there. I mean, some of the CEOs of these companies are no longer there. The market caps have gone down. So like, I don't think I'm saying anything that's not substantiated by like real life data and evidence. But to me, it feels fairly obvious that those companies are in trouble unless they pivot quickly. And the ones that will do well are the ones that are looking at this more holistically, and being very nimble in that effort.
I love that. In the work you've done then, just to kind of start wrapping up, is there a specific part within sort of teams or organizations over the course of your career, whether it's companies you've worked in or companies you've, looked at from the outside? Is there somewhere within their organization where you see things consistently sort of breaking down when it comes to, execution, performance? Is there a specific kind of bottleneck that you've seen, or does it vary company to company?
Yeah, I think that most problems stem to discovery, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of people don't realize that because they'll see that the breakdown happens somewhere else in the process and they'll attribute it to that later stage, or like, maybe after a demo, it doesn't go far. And then they think that the demo is wrong and they need to fix the demo. But to me, I think most problems are discovery problems because what people fail to get to early in discovery is the actual level of impact. So to give you an example, in my world, we are a huge cost saver for people, and we can generally figure out pretty quickly how much savings we will generate them. So there's a literal dollar figure that we can tie to the program. But I typically actually want to go a step further and understand what is the impact of the savings? Because we all know that people want to save money. Like it's not, if I say, well, you'd save $100,000, like, why does that matter to you? That might seem like a dumb question, but it's not as dumb of a question if they say, the CEO wants an initiative to all the leaders to try to find $2 million in savings. So if I can find 100 grand, then I will have done my part. And, therefore, like now I know what it is. This is about a leader who has some sort of politics within their organization. And the value is that I can get them a win. Right. But the alternative might be that, there's some other employee benefit program, maybe a wellness program that if they had that extra money that they would be able to offer. And therefore, by offering that problem, they think they would increase their retention by 5%, right? That's actually even more like you would think that the most tangible thing is the $100,000, but it's about what does the $100,000 actually get you? Like, what does it mean for the company? And if it means I can retain 5% more people, what that means is that they're going to save even more money on hiring and recruiting. And so it's a compounding effect, right? So like, that's where I want us to go in discovery. It's not to stop at what feels like the obvious answer. Great, I can save you 100 grand. It's like, well, why does that matter? Because to some people, saving 100 grand actually doesn't matter and it's not worth doing anything. Right. So like, that's where we need to get to is like real implications in discovery. I find that like of even companies I coach or advise, things like that, like 99% of the time, there's always a failure to get there in that discovery call, like a very, very high. I mean, I don't even think I'm exaggerating with 99% where we fail to get to that real deeper level. And that's where the missed opportunity comes, because later down the funnel, if the customer has not been made aware of why this truly matters, they don't see the urgency to continue.
It's almost like, is it the case that so many people with that discovery call, that initial one, they spend so much time talking about the product and, oh, here's the color of our website and this is what this looks like and this is what this does, rather than actually focusing on the nail in the customer's foot, and here's how I'm going to draw it out for you. One guy we had on the podcast, Richard Blundell, who's an author, he was like, doctors and dentists are the best salespeople in the world because they'll just tell you, I have a solution here for your problem. This is the problem you're having, and this is it. And they have 100% success rate.
Yeah. It's not so much that they're talking. It's more that I feel like they're running through a checklist. They're getting answers to questions, but they're not getting to why it matters. It's almost like they're following a playbook. They think that they have to ask certain questions, but they need to be asking the questions for the sake of a genuine interest in helping. And like, if you were helping a friend with something and you were let's say they were having trouble with a relationship or whatever, you would ask them about the facts on the ground, but then you would ask them about how it's making them feel and why they felt that way and what are the implications to the feelings. Like, are they not sleeping at night? Like, that's the way that we need to get with the customer. Like, we need to get to like that deeper level. So I think it's not always that they're talking too much. It's that they're not taking the information they're getting and putting it to use.
Understood. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Jeff, so much value in this. Thanks for sharing so much about, what you do and the breadth of the experience that you've had over the course of this career that you've got to. Where can people go if they want to find out more about you?
I have a website, jeffkirchick.com. Probably go there. My books are on there. So yeah, come check me out.
Love it. Jeff, thanks for sharing everything. Thanks to all of you for listening, and we will see you all for the next one.
Awesome. Thanks.